Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another round of Basis Picks. As always, please like and subscribe, share with a friend, a colleague, a relative, an associate, an enemy, any and all in between. It's appreciated. This is the first time I think I'm ever going to be doing individual basis picks, or pick in this case, for an entire card. Luckily, I've got one less fight that I have to do, so one less upload to do before Saturday's watch-alongs take place. But yeah, we're going to start it off with bottom of the bill, which is Joshua Buatsi, or Joshua Sena Kwesi Buatsi versus Callum Smith. This is actually a very difficult fight for me to process. On one hand, everything tells me that the person who should win this fight and win this fight fairly comfortably is Joshua Buatsi. He's the natural 175 pounder. Like, I don't think there's ever been a time where it was fathomable that he could have made 168 pounds the same way that Callum Smith did. But with that being said, Callum Smith is the visibly bigger of the two, so you then wonder how the hell did he ever manage to make 168. Looking at the two of them, one has, I feel, a much better fundamental foundation, and the work that Joshua Buatsi has been doing with Virgil Hunter, you can see that he's been focused on feet first, then arms, then fists. Basically, like, everything is about making sure the feet are in the correct positions to punch, and to punch with full rotation. Everything is making sure that the feet go back together, they go to the side together, they go forward together. Making sure that balance and poise is a very existential thing that takes place in the ring. The one caveat to that, though, is Buatsi by himself, he has a very sort of a very pronounced tendency to want to exchange or want to get his lick back, very similar to what Terence Crawford does. But I feel like when Joshua Buatsi does it, it's a bit more, it tends to either be a bit more reckless or a bit more rushed. There used to be times where Terence would do that as well, but he calmed down in later times and then figured out, okay, I can get my lick back in a different way while still keeping my chin tucked. You'll notice that whenever Buatsi does get agitated and angry, he will swing, especially there might be one overhand swing that swings wildly, but as he's coming over the arc, the chin comes up as he's coming down. Same with if he's trying to throw a straight from mid-range and mid-distance, which can all, lead to potentially being countered. And that's one of the that's one of the dangers. I mean, the Marco Kalic fight was a big proponent of that. Now, obviously, eventually he got to Kalic, but that was one of his most difficult fights. Someone with a good amateur pedigree, had decent footwork, was able to box and move, and was very accurate, especially with their jab. And we saw the effects of that fight and how obviously Buatsi's eye looked afterwards. So that's a lot of the dangers and stuff on his side when you're checking this fight and looking to say, okay, well, who's really got the advantage on that side. When you look on the side of Callum Smith, though, it's a bit of a, it's a bit of a conundrum, because there was a time I would have wholeheartedly said, when it was put to us who's the best of Britain, basically, Callum Smith's name never came up in those conversations. Now, usually a lot of times conversations were with the man them, they weren't thinking about Callum Smith. But Callum Smith, former champion, like, you can't discredit that. He's a former WBA and WBC diamond super middleweight champ. Now, diamond belt doesn't necessarily mean anything, but he was legitimate. But we see what his frailties are. We see what he does and doesn't like in the boxing ring. If you pressure him, he folds under pressure. Those arms sort of tuck in, he bends down, crouches down, you don't give him enough time to move, he rushes his shots, hurries his shots, so he can be got to the body. We saw the John Ryder fight, we know, you know, factually he lost that fight and was gifted a decision. Like, you know, that's not, at this point in time, I don't think anyone's really going to be arguing that one. We saw what he looked like in the Canelo fight. Again, someone smaller, stockier, barreling forward, like pressuring, just that front foot pressure, doesn't like it, wilts, essentially just sits on the ropes, soaks up some damage, tries to fire a couple counter shots, and just almost acquiesces and accepts that he's not the big man in that situation. And then to the most devastating consequence of that, we saw what happened in the Artur Beterbiev fight. Again, someone that applies steady pressure, steady front foot pressure, just keeping you engaged, keeping you having to work, keep pushing you forward, pushing you back, sorry, with the jab, stabbing down to the body, pinning you on those ropes, and eventually you start to wilt, give out. Try obviously to throw some counters, but in doing so, open yourself up, get caught. So a lot of that leads me to feel like, you know, there's a lot about Callum Smith that you have to look at and question, well, what level was he really? Like, where how do we really judge him? I mean, if we're being totally honest and fair, his best win was against a one-armed fighter in George Groves. Since then, he hasn't had a win that's done better than that. That was Groves' very last fight as a pro. You know, the John Ryder win was, you know, a loss in most people's eyes, similar to you know, Jack Catterall and Josh Taylor the first time. Then you get Canelo, obviously you get and you get Beterbiev. But then there is the Castillo fight, where we see quite conclusively that at 175 pounds, he was a pretty big puncher at 168, but at 175, like, the power came up with him and it translated and actually gives him a much better playing field, especially in the land of the giants. Now, looking at it, 175, he's the taller of the two. He's probably about 2 inches taller. I don't know who's got the longer reach of the two. I know they will be down on BoxRec and stuff, but you know, sometimes they're never fully fully correct. But both guys prefer to be mid-range when they're exchanging. I would assume in the mid-range battle, because Callum Smith's arms may have a little further to travel, that might actually make him a bit more deadly, because when he reaches the target, as he hits the target, he's still got a little more time to be able to go through it. Whereas I guess when Buatsi will catch him in mid-range, he'll be kind of connecting towards the end of his of his reach, as opposed to sort of, you know, three quarters in. So this is kind of how I'm expecting the fight to go, and I've gone back and forth on it. The one thing that I think is the biggest issue for me is the fact that Joshua Buatsi doesn't work consistently in a round. He does a lot of good work, maybe at the start, maybe in the middle, or maybe at the end, but it's never consistent. There's one stanza where you might get 20 to 30 seconds of top-notch quality action, and then the rest of it is standing, posing, maybe having a look, circling around, trying to get a breath back to go again for another attack. Callum Smith is a bit more industrious when he's in the ring, and I think part of that is going to be what will benefit him here, because in those moments where Buatsi wants to work, especially coming those middle to later rounds, I still think Callum Smith's going to be prepared to try to trade. He's going to be prepared to aim to that body, to hit the body, try to go up top. I think he's going to try for that catch counter left hook that he does quite a bit. And this is definitely, I think, the hardest puncher that Buatsi's been in the ring with. There's always been questions about his chin. None obviously have been substantiated at this point. No questions have had any answers given conclusively, and I think it's you know, I think he's quite sort of solid in that department. But if there's ever a person that's going to test whether that's the case, it is Callum Smith. I'm really struggling on which way to lean now that I'm actually doing this breakdown. Now, on my predictions league, I gave a prediction, and I'm trying to think whether I'm going to stick with that prediction here. But because that's what I gave earlier, that's what I'm going to give here. So look, the way I look at it, Joshua Buatsi is kind of, I feel like he's got the better momentum. He's got the better, I feel like he's had sort of the better level of activity, if you want to call that. But overall, I think that the fact that Callum Smith has just been in there with much better levels of opposition throughout his career will stand him in good stead. There's something telling me that this fight's going to be close. Someone is going to get hurt, probably middle to late rounds, but I do think that they're going to be able to see through the crisis, and I think this goes to the cards. And in saying that, I think that Callum Smith is going to do just enough in this fight to get through on the cards in probably a split decision, in something that could look at and be highly contestable. Was that really who should have got the nod or not? But I think he's going to just work enough in those moments where Joshua Buatsi wants to sort of take the moments to reset and compose himself. And I think that Smith, if the judges are dealing with activity and who's maybe landing the sort of the more consistent work, maybe not the heaviest punches at all times, but just the more consistent work, I do think that Callum Smith's gonna get the nod. And look, he's only been down and only been knocked out once in his career, and that was to Beterbiev, who pretty much does that to everyone not named Dimitri Bivol. So, you know, that's not a damning indictment in itself. But as much as I think Buatsi's got the better momentum, I think that the experience of Callum Smith is gonna pay dividends in this one. So that's where I'm going to go for this particular prediction. Leave yours down below, please. Like, subscribe and share. Thank you very much, and until the next video, Space's Pick, locked.